You know that among the Gentiles, those that they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Ever since Jesus dropped on the opening scene of Mark's gospel account like a bomb going off in his baptism in the Jordan River, Jesus has been on a very different trajectory as King of Israel. It got even more explicit that his way is not Caesar's way or Herod's way from the middle of chapter 8, where Jesus began smacking down the disciples' pretensions of greatness, their hunger for power and glory beside him, their vision of a militarily triumphant king of Israel vanquishing the enemies of Israel. Get behind me, Satan, Jesus says to all of that. Jesus' way of kingship continued to baffle the disciples. A king takes a donkey, takes a horse, takes your stuff for his needs. He doesn't borrow it for a few hours and send it back. His way is so different to the way of Caesar and Herod. They had seen Jesus building towards something big, and it was almost here, yet he kept slapping them with teaching about humility and using little children and shocked rich men as object lessons to drive home his point. Go back and read again, chapters 8, 9 and 10. He kept on about being betrayed and executed, and on the third day rising again. It made no sense to their hopes or dreams for their nation. So Jesus left the crowd in Jerusalem hanging off the edge of their seats on this day, no doubt baffled by his unusual manoeuvres. On that day, as he rode into town in seeming fulfillment of ancient prophecy, receiving the red carpet treatment, people giving the shirts off their backs so he wouldn't suffer any dust in his ride, the ticker tape parade, they would have been fully expecting Jesus to ride directly to the headquarters of Pontius Pilate and to wipe him from the face of the earth with his extraordinary power, or at least incite the crowd to burn down his garrison and put them all to death. The crowd was at fever pitch. They were ready to do anything that Jesus told them to do. And no doubt the Roman garrison was on edge too, expecting the worst at any moment. But instead, Jesus takes a strange turn into the temple. He has a quiet look around, especially checking out the kiosk, and he goes back to the edge of town to the motor inn for the night. Okay, that was a bit of an anticlimax. That was unexpected. Next day, he's heading back to the temple, and on the way, he stops to curse out an unfruitful fig tree that's pretending to be not its fault that it's got no fruit on it. But he's driving home a point. It's indicative of the heart of his nation, the temple, and what's going on there. No fruit there, so what's the point of your existence? Be gone. Again, as Jesus rolls into town, there's no rounding up of an army. There's no wielding of godly power to kill anyone or storming the Roman garrison. He simply goes back to the temple and proceeds to stop the temple life in its tracks, arresting their attention. He's a one-man protest. Some folks like to use this as a proof text about how we should prioritize prayer or pray more as a church. Now, praying isn't wrong. God wants us to talk with him. He wants us to have a conversational relationship with him like a dad and his child. And he wants us to get in his grill like an ambassador coming before a king, praying and interceding on behalf of the world and the church. But that's not Jesus' point here. He's announcing God's judgment on the temple and those who run it. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations. but you have made it a den of robbers. Now, some translators say den of robbers, others thieves, others bandits, but in doing so, their desire is to shore up the power and position, especially of the original translators years ago, about 500 years ago, shore up the power and position of the British monarch. They don't want rebels or violent revolutionaries, so they just call them thieves, you know. And this completely misses Jesus' intent. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of violent revolutionaries. People are willing to kill and murder to see their nation put right. The temple, Mount Zion, Jerusalem are all meant to be a place in which the ways of the Creator of all things can be shared with the whole human race. To live up to its name, Jerusalem, the city of peace, a place of healing and wholeness for all the peoples of the planet, a place where the widow, the stranger, the orphan, the foreigner, and the poor are honoured and cared for justly. A city that is a light to the nations. Instead, in their zeal for freedom and national security, the political and religious elite in Jerusalem are scheming and plotting the violent overthrow of the Roman authorities, and they will kill anyone who gets in their way. Indeed, they make Jesus' point for him about being a den of violent revolutionaries when, after he finishes talking, they continue to plot in how they're going to kill him. For them, the only way for Rome to be defeated is to have a nice big pile of dead Romans on the end of their spears and swords. Jesus' preaching is unhelpfully undermining their work. This political and religious elite and the system they oversee has become so corrupted by its own hunger for power and position and glory, it will not recognize God at work in Jesus of Nazareth, despite the miracles and despite the way he has captured the imagination of the people. They'd rather assassinate him. On the way back to the motor inn, Peter discovers the fig tree wholly dead, right down to the roots. He is shocked. How can that happen overnight? Well, Jesus is saying, if you want to know the heart of this nation, it's right there. It's dead down to the roots. It's a parable of God's judgment on his temple and those who run it, because Jesus goes on to say, the things he goes on to say are only secondarily about trusting God, about faith, and about how faith plays out in answered prayer. Primarily, he's talking about the heart of his nation. If you say to this mountain, not to say, if you say to a mountain, like people have taken it out of context and use it, if you say to this mountain, which mountain? Mount Zion, the temple, the whole corrupt system. If you say to this mountain, be uprooted and cast into the sea, it will be done. What is Jesus doing? Tearing out the dead heart of the nation to replace it with the living hope that God offers in him. The bottom line of Jesus' teaching on the side about the power of prayer is forgiveness. It's instructive for us that when he links the kind of trust in God that can tear down a corrupt political regime, the only thing he directly links it to is our capacity to forgive and to pray for God's help to forgive. This is the way, Jesus' way. The Jerusalem leaders don't want to hear him on this. They're busy plotting an armed rebellion, and they will not forgive anyone their trespasses. So they confront him. Who do you think you are to be talking like this? They ask him at the end of chapter 11, And Jesus responds, if you blokes can't see what's right in front of your nose, I am not going to spell it out for you. And so they will be the architects of their own doom. Jesus is proved right when 40 years later, in response to the armed uprising of the Jewish people, the Romans tear everything down and what one brick is left upon another. The siege of Jerusalem was horrific. People were eating their babies to survive. The whole place is pulled apart and burned down to the ground because they would not forgive. All of it is gone while the church stands today. Jesus' kingdom has been well and truly established on this earth. The sun will never set on it and it will never come to an end. So what is the point of difference between church and surrounding society? In what ways are we just a mirror image of the hopes and dreams for power and position and glory of that corrupt and dying world out there? Now, some people get stuck in the nitty-gritty, the nitpicky stuff, like not drinking, not smoking, not dancing, not going to the movies, not wearing lipstick. You probably know all the things that people won't do to think that they're being a point of difference to the world. But Jesus is more concerned about the big ticket stuff: humility, sacrificial service, a willingness to stay on message for him even if it gets you killed, a concern for all the people that God has made, not just me and my friends or me and my country, but all the people of the world. And he's concerned about this, the most important thing of all: forgiveness as central to human freedom and fullness of life. Look at Russia today. They supposedly just re-elected Putin, who is basically a false king, an emperor, and the Russian Orthodox Church fully endorses him, a man who murders his opponents and locks them up and lies to his people. I wonder what the point of difference is between the church in Russia and the rule of Putin. What about the USA, where churches are trying to figure out which candidate in the election to endorse? God bless Donald Trump. God bless Joe Biden. Really? Either of them? What is the point of difference between those men and the life of the kingdom of Jesus as it is expressed in the church that is faithful to Jesus' heart? What about in our own country? We always seem to elect leaders that are going to serve my own personal interests, to look after my backyard, while we remain unconcerned about the broader community and what we all need together. We continue to get disappointing leadership in this country because we can't think beyond ourselves, the wrongs that have been done to us, or our own cravings for more. And so we've locked ourselves into a system where we vote Liberal, Labor or National because we can't have a vision of assessing candidates on the content of their character and their hopes and dreams for a better world. The church exists to teach people about the ways of the Creator God as he has shown us concretely in the life of his King, Jesus. The church is a house of prayer for all of the nations. Our central prayer is that the empires of this world will be uprooted and cast into the sea to be replaced with the empire of God, the empire of King Jesus. Are we believing for that in our common life? Or are we just resigned to more of the same lackluster, self-serving ego show that we've got in this country? At the heart of all Jesus says today is this: whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. Not sometimes, not maybe or if, whenever, which means every time. Whenever you stand praying, forgive. If we can't or won't forgive, the end of the world begins with us. We are blocking the freedom and life and peace God is willing to give us, and the peace he wants to give to the world flowing through us. He knows that we harbour resentments and hurts. He knows that we're good at hanging on to them and thinking about them day and night and scheming about how we can get our way or get people back. He knows how it blocks us from receiving the Father's blessings. And so he has given us an unrelenting discipline. Whenever you stand praying, forgive. And he's just in this chapter named how unforgiveness will lead an entire nation to its destruction. It will not be so for his empire or his people. That is the beginning, the middle, and the end of who we are as subjects of King Jesus, the forgiveness people. Because we follow one who, as he was being nailed to the cross, prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Jesus says to you today, whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. The Lord be with you. Let us pray.